Well, hello there. I'm Joshua Johnson. It's great to be with you on this Monday, September 12th. And here's some of what we're talking about tonight. The honors for Queen Elizabeth II continue today in Scotland. She was half Scottish, and thousands said their goodbyes along Edinburgh's Royal Mile. We'll have the latest on the upcoming ceremonies, the protests so far, and we'll share some of your thoughts on Queen Elizabeth. Ukraine says it is recapturing territory from Russian forces, including a key city. What will this mean for the push to end the invasion? Plus, President Biden is holding fast on his goal to cut cancer deaths in half. We'll tell you how he wants to go about it now. And what's the best college in the U.S.? Sorry, football fans, we're talking about the U.S. News and World Report rankings. More on this year's lists and the debate over how much power they should have. Queen Elizabeth II first received the crown of Scotland at the beginning of her reign in 1953. Today it was presented again at the end. The official farewell ceremonies began in Scotland with a service of prayer and reflection at St. Giles Cathedral. Honor guards fired cannon as thousands of people lined the streets of Edinburgh. King Charles III led a procession behind the Queen's coffin on what's known as the Royal Mile. Last year, Queen Elizabeth spoke of her deep and abiding affection for Scotland. She recalled many happy memories there with her husband, Prince Philip. The Queen was often seen enjoying Scotland's natural beauty, sometimes with her corgis nearby. Her mother, also named Elizabeth, was Scottish, as was her first private tutor. Let's begin with NBC foreign correspondent Matt Bradley in London. And Matt, could you begin by just telling us a bit more about the significance of what we saw today? I think it's not an accident that the royal ceremonies to honor the Queen began in her beloved Scotland.
Well, the fact is that she died in Scotland, so that's one of the reasons why all of this is starting up there. But, you know, what we're seeing, Joshua, is pomp and ceremony that's going from the top of the country in Scotland. And actually, she drove, her coffin drove north from Balmoral after she died to Inverness, almost the extreme northern tip of the country in Scotland, and then went down to Edinburgh. And that's where she is right now, and that's where she's going to remain until her body is moved down here to London in the next couple of days, and that's where she's going to be sitting in this hall behind me, Westminster Hall. It's a 1,000-year-old room inside the House of Commons building. And, you know, what we saw today, really, Joshua, was very interesting. It was kind of the splicing, the collision between the monarchy and the democratic politics that really sit so comfortably together in Britain. And we really only see the collision between those two almost contradictory forces here every once in a while on occasions like this. And this was when we saw the King Charles, before he went up to Scotland, the new king addressed both houses of Parliament, also in that same room, Westminster Hall, right behind me, right where the Queen's coffin will be lying in state within the next couple of days. And so, you know, he thanked Parliament. Parliament thanked him. He did the same with the Scottish Parliament later today. And it just goes to show it's that interchange between democracy, those officials who are elected and who derive their authority from the public, and the monarchy, who derives their authority, depending on how you believe it, from God himself. And so the monarch, who relies on the elected legislature for democracy, and the elected legislature who relies on the monarch for authority, we saw that interchange today, and it really was interesting. And as we start to see more and more of this pomp and ceremony unfolding across the country, you're going to start to see more of those odd bedfellows as all of this goes on, steeped in symbolism, expressing through word and deed what this country really is all about as they change the leadership here. Joshua?
Speaking of that symbolism, let's take a look at some of the symmetry in that symbolism, as we told you at the beginning, between that moment with the crown in 1953 and today. Watch.
The Scottish crown is offered to the Queen.
Matt, obviously King Charles III is a huge part of the ceremonies over the next few days between now and the 19th. What are some of the early reactions like in terms of how the people are reacting to King Charles III and how he's been handling the ceremonies thus far?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a great question. You're talking about this symmetry. There's an interesting symmetry playing out within the next week where you're seeing the ascension of this new king, King Charles III, alongside the mourning and the burial of the old queen, of the late queen, his mother, Elizabeth II. And those two things are playing out at the same time, concurrently, in parallel tracks, and again, all across the country. This highly choreographed, intensely spiritually symbolic effort that really is just splaying out across all of the British Isles. And they have to be done at the same time, because it's not just about welcoming this new king or mourning this deceased queen. It's taken together a sense of continuity, showing that one sovereign leads directly into the other, and that there is no daylight between one sovereign and the next, that this country will always have a king or a queen or a monarch. That is one of the things that is being expressed here, and we're starting to see that, and we will be seeing that over the next couple of days. And I was mentioning to you that collision between the elected politics and the monarch. That's what we're going to see more of as this goes on. And again, a lot of it might even skip past us because it really is just so symbolic. A lot of this dates back to times when the death of a monarch would have been a hugely dangerous political moment, deeply destabilizing, and the need to express that continuity and the need to show that there is no lack of leadership at any moment. There's no heartbeat where there isn't a ruler. That was considered a deeply important element of this whole process, and it's one that's preserved today in the traditions that we're seeing. Joshua?
Yeah, the doctrine of perpetuity certainly remains in effect, very much so, as we've seen so far. Matt, very briefly, before I let you go, considering you're standing right near Westminster, that's where the preparations are going to be made for some of the viewings of the Queen. Up and along the River Thames, I believe they're expecting the lines to stretch for miles and miles, right?
Yeah, and we're already hearing from the government. They're saying don't bring small children. Be prepared to wait in line. Don't expect to be getting food and water. Be prepared to wait for hours. This is like an emergency room. This is going to be 24 hours where you're going to be able to access the coffin of the late queen. I mean, it's going to be open for everybody at all times for more than 4 straight days. That's an extraordinary event to have that kind of logistical setup to accommodate so many strangers, so many people coming through, and they've already said that there's going to be airport-like security for those who are going to be visiting the Queen's coffin. So, and you mentioned, Joshua, I don't think I answered your question earlier. How are the British people taking to this new king? I don't know. I think that it seems like if you see the explosion of emotion that's coming out for the Queen, she anointed this successor, her son, and it seems as though the public so far, even though he hasn't always been popular, it seems as though they are welcoming this new king. And again, we're going to be seeing more of that in the next couple of days, coming to a head on Monday with Her Majesty's funeral. Joshua?
We will indeed, and we will have the next few months as we get closer to the coronation to see how the British people are responding to King Charles III. Thank you, Matt. That's NBC foreign correspondent Matt Bradley starting us off from Westminster in London. Meanwhile, Queen Elizabeth's successor is fulfilling his new duties as king. Charles III addressed Parliament in London before heading to Scotland.
Her late Majesty pledged herself to serve her country and her people, and to maintain the precious principles of constitutional government which lie at the heart of our nation. She set an example of selfless duty, which, with God's help and your counsels, I am resolved faithfully to follow.
Let us continue now with Hillary Fordwich, a global business analyst and Royals commentator. Ms. Fordwich, good to see you again. Welcome back.
Thank you, Joshua.
I don't want to deal in too much hyperbole, but it's almost hard to overstate how significant these last few days have been, not only seeing a new monarch in the United Kingdom, but literally seeing the new monarch. That some aspects of this process have been televised for the very first time in human history. What has stood out to you the most in terms of the significance of these last few days?
Where do I start, Joshua? There's been so much. One thing I would say, when you say about the significance and the history behind it, we were just talking about some of what's happened. The proclamations, by the way, remember that they were read out 3 days later in Scotland. Do you know why it's 3 days? Because that's how long it took the messenger to ride by horse to fill them. So the proclamation had to be read. There were no iPhones, there were no telephones, there was no mail. That's how long it took centuries ago. Then you also talked about Scotland, the significance of this being in Scotland. Well, Scotland to the Queen was so very special. Why is it special today? And what has really stood out is that there's been a lot of talk about Scottish devolution. The First Minister there, Nicola Sturgeon, maybe wanting a referendum about it again. There was such a tight call before. We have seen an outpouring from the Scots for their beloved Queen. One thing I would mention is during that Royal Mile today, Edinburgh, towards Edinburgh, there was a protester, very interesting, that he shouted out in the crowd, and he was immediately, this is interesting, immediately overwhelmed with, the crowd started breaking into a unanimous God Save the King to squelch him out. I thought it was an interesting thing to see. And then also to your question about history, I could go on forever, but what else would you like to know? What else would you like?
Well, we'll have more on that protester in just a minute. Our partners at Sky News provided a report, and we'll get to that in just a second. But I hear you in terms of just the timing of all of this. When you look just on a map in terms of how far north of Edinburgh Balmoral is, and then north of London, and just the distances, it's kind of understandable historically what the timetable has been like. But in terms of this current king, we're getting reactions from British leaders past and present. David Cameron, who was the former prime minister 3 prime ministers ago, gave his thoughts on the new king in an interview on Fox News. Here's part of what he said.
Well, the first thing about him is that he's extremely intelligent and charming and very hard-working. I remember flying with him to the King of Saudi Arabia's funeral, and he'd never put his pen down. He worked, 7 hours there, 7 hours back, never 1 minute stopped working on his speeches and his letters and everything else.
What is your sense of the way that the British people are receiving King Charles III so far? We heard Matt Bradley say that it's maybe a little too soon to know. Perhaps everyone's still kind of in the shell shock of the loss of Queen Elizabeth.
Yes, well, it remains to be seen, Joshua. What I would say, it was an indication to see that crowd in Scotland that I just mentioned. Because when they overwhelmed that protester with singing God Save the King, what did that mean? No one commanded them to, no one told them to. And I tell you, you should take note of this. Do you know that Putin is the first international leader? He actually beat everybody by giving his congratulations to Prince Charles, even though it was Prince Charles in 2014. An analogy between him and Adolf Hitler, and I can give the details about that. But what does that show? Maybe even Putin is taking note that you can't command people's feelings, you can't dictate people's feelings. So now to your question, with regard to the reaction. So far, we've seen nothing really but positivity. Why? Because his speech was so eloquent, so articulate, and also so heartfelt. He also, in a BBC interview a number of years ago, said, I'm not stupid. He knows that his role has to change. He is a constitutional monarch. He only is there at the behest, really, of the people. So he knows he needs to rise above politics, and he needs to remain politically neutral. Thus far, he's putting all his steps right. And what David Cameron said was totally true. He's exceptionally hardworking. Look, he's 73 years old, and there he was standing by the casket of his mother. How many 73-year-olds are going to be doing that?
I must ask you about the politics of this, of course, because we just heard from Matt Bradley at Westminster, where the Queen will lie in state for a number of days before the funeral at Westminster Abbey on Monday, which is basically just behind Westminster. But after that, the House of Commons is going to get back to business. We've got a new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, who has made some very big plans to try to right some of the UK's problems, including economic issues, energy prices, and so on. What does this mean for the honeymoon period? How long, or how do the coronation or the accession of the new king and the procession of day-to-day democratic politics in the UK intersect? When does one start to bleed into the other, or do those kind of exist in different orbits?
Well, they are in different orbits to a certain extent. Just like here, we actually have a head of state. It just happens to be one person, of course. It happens to be our president, so it's both. But in the UK, what you're going to see, definitely, is a winter of discontent. We don't know to what extent. There's going to be energy shortages, yes. One thing that was interesting with regard to the Queen's passing was that the strikers called off their strikes. I thought that was interesting that everybody is behind her. When you saw her coffin leaving Balmoral, did you see that the tractors that were lined up in the fields there, no one commanded them, Joshua, no one told them to. That was out of respect. So there is this degree of respect, just like actually Winston Churchill's funeral. Remember that he had been ousted by the Labour government, by the people. A Labour government had come in, and then when his funeral cortege passed, all the cranes, the workers, the dock workers lowered their cranes. Now, what does that mean for today? What it means is those people that are those that are discontent do show a lot of respect. What is that going to mean? Well, this winter, that Liz Truss has already instituted a $150 billion package that's an energy package that's going to cap the average household's energy bills. They're supposed to be capped at about £2,500. That's less than just less than $3,000. Still absolutely, though, astronomical, particularly for those living on the edge. It is going to be a winter of discontent. We just have to see, as I said, to what extent.
I should like to have you back another night to talk more about that in terms of just the dollars and cents, or the dollars and cents, so to speak, in terms of how that will play out and what all this will mean going forward, because it is such a big challenge. But for now, I appreciate your perspective on the proceedings today. Hillary Fordwich, good to see you. Thank you very much. You know, the world has not had a new British monarch in 70 years, so we're sure you have questions. Send them to us, and our experts can get you some answers. We're at NBC Now Tonight on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. You can always leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC. If you're calling from somewhere else around the world, we'd love to hear from you as well about this transition in the monarchy, 888-575-2622, or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Tonight's headlines begin with the Justice Department's investigation of the January 6th attack. NBC News has confirmed that in the last week, DOJ issued about 40 subpoenas to people in former President Trump's circle. The New York Times broke this story. The subpoenas reportedly went both to low-level aides and to Mr. Trump's most senior advisors. Two sources tell us they're all related to what he and his associates did on the 6th. A lawyer for former NYPD Commissioner Bernard Carrick confirmed that he received a subpoena. Justice Department officials also seized 2 cell phones from Mr. Trump's top advisors. There are reports of progress on the battlefields of Ukraine against Russian forces. Ukrainian forces say they have now recaptured some Russian-occupied territories. Invaders have controlled parts of the northeastern city of Kharkiv for months, but some quick attacks this weekend reportedly forced Russian soldiers out. Ukraine's chief commander says his forces have reclaimed nearly 1,200 square miles of territory this month. That might signal a shift in this war, or, as the Ukrainian defense minister put it yesterday, quote, "It's a sign that Russia can be defeated," unquote. NBC foreign correspondent Megan Fitzgerald has more.
It's been 2 weeks exactly to the day since the Ukrainians launched this counteroffensive. Since then, Ukraine's President Zelensky is saying that they've been able to recapture some 2,300 square miles of territory. Now, this counteroffensive was launched in the southern part of the country, in the Kherson region, but we're seeing some significant advancements, especially over the last several days, in the northeastern part of the country, in the Kharkiv region. There, Zelensky says that they've been able to take back dozens and dozens of towns and settlements in the area there. And we're already seeing video from soldiers on the ground of people in those areas rushing to these soldiers, thanking them for liberating them. Many of these people living in Russian-occupied territory for months now. We've also seen in this region where the Russian soldiers have retreated. Of course, the Russian Defense Ministry is saying that they're not retreating, they're just redeploying their troops to the east. But this is certainly significant advancements that we're seeing here by the Ukrainians. Meanwhile, all eyes on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, where some good news, some positive news for the first time in several weeks. Ukrainian officials, energy officials, are saying that they've been able to restore a second power line to this plant. Of course, the concern here is increased shelling at any time could knock these plants, these lines going to the plant offline. But at this point, there is some good news that the plant is being powered by 2 external lines. Back to you.
Thank you, Megan. That was NBC foreign correspondent Megan Fitzgerald reporting from Kyiv. In Minnesota, 15,000 nurses are off the job tonight. They went on strike today, affecting 16 hospitals. The Minnesota Nurses Association plans to stay off the job for 3 days. Its 3-year contract expired in the spring, and COVID has made America's nursing shortage worse. The union is calling for better pay and more paid time off. One hospital group says the strike could have been avoided and that the Nurses Association did not exhaust all efforts to reach an agreement. The affected hospitals say they plan to remain open. Who will review the documents that were seized from Mar-a-Lago? The Justice Department is haggling with former President Trump's lawyers over choosing a special master. But the Trump team says it opposes the DOJ's 2 nominees. Now the Justice Department is saying it is open to a judge that Trump's legal team put forward. This negotiation has paused the federal investigation into these documents. DOJ is asking to immediately restart a key part of its criminal probe, but today, Mr. Trump's lawyers asked the judge to deny that request. NBC national security correspondent Ken Delanian has more from Washington. Hey, Ken.
Joshua, the Trump team today filed its response to that Justice Department appeal of the judge's ruling, where the Justice Department asked the judge to temporarily halt her order, telling them that they can't use the classified documents that they seized at Mar-a-Lago in their investigation. The Trump team came back and said, absolutely, that order should remain in place, and a special master should review all of these documents, including the ones marked classified. They basically, the Trump team, portrayed this as a document storage dispute that has spiraled out of control, as they put it. And they said that the criminal investigation here is unprecedented and misguided. They say that the Justice Department is criminalizing what is really a routine dispute between a former president and the National Archives over the disposition of presidential records. And the Trump team argues that all of these records are either Donald Trump's records or presidential records, so they either belong to Trump or they belong to the archives, but there's no crimes involved here. And they also continually refer to the classified documents as allegedly classified, and they say that the onus is on the Justice Department to prove that they were in fact classified, given that the president has absolute declassification authority. And they also minimize any potential national security harm here. They say that these documents, even if they were sensitive, were stored at Mar-a-Lago, guarded by Secret Service, in no danger of getting into the wrong hands. Obviously, the Justice Department dramatically disagrees with that perspective. And if you recall, the 3 statutes that they cite in their warrant, including the Espionage Act, don't even require that the information be classified. It's about mishandling sensitive documents. And the other issue here that the Trump team doesn't raise in their filing is that some of these records, by their very nature, would not be presidential records. They would be other government agency records, like CIA records or National Security Agency records. And those are not the property of Donald Trump. They're not the property of the archives. They're the property of the U.S. government, American taxpayers. So that's where the dispute is, and now the judge will have to decide whether she will put a stay on her ruling while the DOJ appeals it to the 11th Circuit. If she does not do that, the Justice Department will ask the 11th Circuit to do that. Meanwhile, on a separate track, both sides are still negotiating over who would play the role of special master. They've each proposed candidates, and the Trump team also filed today and said that they disagree with the proposed Justice Department candidates, but want to tell the judge privately why. But so that track is happening even as the 2 sides fundamentally argue about the nature of the case. And I think this Trump document was most important today for not what it says about the special master, but what it says about Donald Trump's potential defenses in this case. 1, prove the documents were classified. 2, prove they weren't presidential records and they didn't belong to me. And a lot of legal experts say wouldn't be that hard for the Justice Department to prove that, but we'll have to wait and see. Back to you, Joshua.
Thank you, Ken. That's NBC's Ken Delaney reporting from Washington. And by the way, with regard to the story about the DOJ issuing 40 subpoenas, we should note that the department has declined to comment on the story, at least thus far. This November, voters in Michigan will decide on abortion rights in their state. One lifelong Republican says she is rethinking her stance after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. She spoke with NBC's Yamiche Alcindor.
In June, when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, lifelong Republican Jessica Leach was devastated.
I cried for weeks. I cried for my daughter. I always considered myself pro-life.
The ruling changed that. Jessica got pregnant at 19 and visited an abortion clinic to weigh her options. She decided to have her son, who's now 17, and says being able to make that choice is something every woman deserves.
What do you say to people who think your story is an example of why abortion shouldn't be an option?
I would tell those people that until recently, it was always a hypothetical. I would beg them to understand that having these options paved the way for me to be a good mother, and coercing motherhood is inhumane.
In Michigan, residents will vote on a ballot referendum in November that would enshrine abortion rights into the state constitution.
You're a doctor.
Incumbent Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer is also up for re-election.
What is at stake in this election and in the ballot referendum?
Well, abortion and the right to be a full American citizen with agency over your body is on this ballot.
Her views are also shaped by her experiences.
In college, in the days after I was raped, it dawned on me, oh my God, I might be pregnant. And the only thing that gave me a little bit of relief is knowing that I could make a decision that was right for me if that happened.
Her opponent, Republican Tudor Dixon, supports banning abortion with no exception for rape or incest.
I wonder if you could just talk a bit more about your own views and talk to people who are worried about your views being too extreme.
I have shared my own pro-life story. I lost a baby at 18 weeks. When I lost the baby, the doctor said this baby probably died in the womb at 16 weeks. I held a beautiful baby girl.
Dixon also does not believe abortion is a top issue for voters.
They're concerned with how to get their kids back on track after they were kept out of school. And if you look at our crime rates in the past couple of years, it's just continued to rise, and why our businesses are being crushed by big government.
Both supporters and opponents of the referendum are mobilizing, like anti-abortion rights activist Christian Polo.
I'm very concerned. Frankly, the policies that are being put forth in this abortion amendment here in Michigan are some of the most extremist policies we've seen in the entire country.
Meantime, Jessica hopes sharing her story helps keep abortion legal in Michigan. Her son Jason sent her a text the day of our interview.
Your life experiences, our relationship after you decided to keep me and change your life around me, and now your perspective of life is what the world needs most.
Yamiche Alcindor, NBC News, Michigan.
Coming up, curing cancer. Today, President Biden spoke about a goal he's held for years. The latest on the president's moonshot when we come back. Today marks 60 years since President John F. Kennedy delivered a historic speech at Rice University in Texas. He promised to land a man on the moon by the end of that decade.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
That promise was met in 1969. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to land on the moon. Today, President Biden commemorated that speech at the Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum in Boston. He pledged an American moonshot of his own to cut the U.S. death rate from cancer in half over the next 25 years.
President Kennedy set a goal to win the space race against Russia and advance science and technology for all of humanity. And when he set that goal, he established a national purpose that could rally the American people in a common cause. And I believe we can usher in the same unwillingness to postpone, the same national purpose that will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills to end cancer as we know it and even cure cancers once and for all.
Joining us now is Dr. Lewis Cantley. He's a professor of cell biology at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. Dr. Cantley, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Before we get to what it might take to meet the president's goal, what's your sense of where we are in terms of trying to cure cancer or at least prevent many cancers? How far have we come?
Well, we've come a long way. Back 60 years ago or so, when there was an initiative to try to cure all cancers, we didn't even know what cancer was. We now know that it's a mutational disease. That there can be mutation predispositions in the germline, why certain people get cancers at higher rates. But most cancers are just sporadic mutations that happen randomly. And these mutations drive the growth of the tumor.
Where do you think the work begins for that? I mean, it seems like there are so many different ways to detect, treat, and deal with cancers, whether it's radiation or chemotherapy or any number of other kinds of cell therapies. I mean, I myself have gotten vaccinated against the human papillomavirus, which causes certain kinds of cancers which can be transmitted among men who have sex with men. So it seems like the efforts to deal with cancer are so vast. I'm not sure where you start, or if you just have to tackle everything all at once.
What impressed me about Joe Biden's speech was that he really proposed that we share information. As you say, there are very many ways to treat a cancer. Different doctors will treat it differently, even for the exact same cancer. Different institutions treat it differently. But we don't really share the information of the successes or failures from those varied treatments. And what is being proposed is that information be widely shared so that, in a de-identified way, so we don't know who got what, but we do know, based on the mutations they had, whether they responded to treatment X versus treatment Y. And if that information is shared, we can make dramatic improvements in cancer outcomes.
I want to make sure I understand what you just said. You're not talking about sharing information in the sense of like journal articles or formal peer-reviewed reports. You're talking about more granular database type data that can be used to correlate different kinds of patients with different kinds of cancers and different kinds of treatments on a more specific level. Is that it?
That's right. And in a more rapid way as well. So that every cancer patient who comes into a cancer center, for example, many will have blood tests. They will sequence DNA in the blood. And there's a lot of information that comes out of that. And if that is shared, and then we see what the outcome of the treatment is, and we know exactly what was going on in that patient, and that detail is shared across the entire country, not just the institution, then we can very quickly collect all that information and make correlations between mutational events and outcomes dependent upon treatments. And it's doable. It requires a lot of organization, but I think this has been thought through pretty carefully.
Before I have to let you go, the president also announced that Dr. Renee Wegerson would serve as the inaugural director of the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, a kind of DARPA for these moonshot medical initiatives. Where do you think we will see the most success the fastest in reducing cancers? Where are we the closest right now to making a breakthrough?
Well, I think sequencing DNA from blood tests, taking 5 mils of blood per patient, we can determine all the events that are going on in their tumor from this small amount of blood. The technology is dramatically improved. That is rarely done with patients, but it could be done. And correlating that then with the treatment and the outcome broadly and sharing it across many institutions, we can very, very quickly arrive at the conclusion of, based on what mutations you have in your cancer, what is the correct therapy for you. We don't currently share that information, but that's, I think, in my opinion, the biggest impact this operation will have.
Dr. Lewis Cantley of the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, appreciate you making time tonight. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Some families use college rankings to make one of the biggest decisions for their futures. But these lists are not just about the best schools, whatever best means. How important and accurate are these rankings? We'll get to that before we go. Consumer rankings help us buy everything from cars to computers to couches. But what about college degrees? Today, U.S. News & World Report released its annual list of the best colleges and universities. And if you've read them before, you probably already know who's on top. Once again, Princeton and MIT led the way. Harvard tied for third. Okay. For the most part, the top 10 remain the same, but there is one major change this year. New York's Columbia University fell from number 2 to number 18. The demotion comes about 8 months after a Columbia math professor accused the school of fudging some key statistics that are used in the rankings. Columbia has since apologized for the errors. A statement released on Friday reads in part, quote, "We deeply regret the deficiencies in our prior reporting and are committed to doing better," unquote. This ranking system is unofficial, obviously, but it's come under a lot of criticism over the years. Joining us now is Andy Lockwood. He's the CEO of Lockwood College Prep and the author of How to Get Into Your Dream College Without Lying, Bribing, or Photoshopping. Mr. Lockwood, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
I wonder what you make of these rankings in general. I'm a big caveat emptor kind of guy, you know, Mr. Buyer Beware. I chose exactly the college that I knew I wanted to go to, that I knew was just right for me, and I still left with pluses and minuses. There is no such thing as a perfect college. So with that in mind, how do you view these rankings? They're just one more tool among many, right?
Yeah, I think they can be a helpful starting point, you know, just to sort of, you know, make an initial filter, but there's no such thing as a perfect college, like you just said. And I can name, you know, probably 7 or 8 people off the top of my head who went to Harvard University who hated it, thought it was, you know, not the right school for them. So rank is, you know, it's interesting. It sells magazines, and it can be a little helpful, but I wouldn't rely on it.
There have been other schools that have been accused of giving inaccurate information. Back in 2018, a former dean of the Temple University Business School got a 14-month sentence for conspiracy after providing fraudulent data for these U.S. News rankings. What is it about these rankings that makes them so valuable that a handful of school executives are willing to lie in the numbers to try to get a leg up?
Well, they're very valuable to the administrations of these colleges themselves because they are, you know, thought to directly drive how many applications they get, and therefore the revenue from the application fees, and then the ability to reject more people and become more highly selective and make it easier to raise more money from their alumni and other donors. So they're pretty important, and pretty much every admissions office tracks the rankings very closely.
Give me a sense of what you think they mean when they say best. I feel like this list actually means most prestigious universities. I mean, it's hard to argue that Princeton and MIT are not colleges of great prestige. Is that maybe a better way to view this? Like if you're the kind of person who's pursuing a degree where the name of the university that you went to would mean a whole lot no matter what profession you're in, that's the way that you read this list? Is there a way to view that ranking that's more useful and more on target?
You know, when I talk to clients who frequently rely on rankings to, you know, to pick colleges, I'm usually quick to point out that rankings are relatively manipulatable, you know, relatively easily manipulated. And, you know, schools that used to be very low rank and super easy to get into, such as Northeastern University, when I was growing up, it admitted 90% of its students. And now I think they admitted 6.7%, and they gamed the rankings. So I think you need to take the rankings with a grain of salt, at the very least, and understand that they can't measure, you know, inherently a lot of things, such as how much effort a student puts in to their college education, and other factors that really have nothing to do with the, you know, the bricks and the mortar or the lazy rivers or whatever other amenities they offer.
Are there certain other factors that you think people should consider when looking at which school is right for them? I mean, I love the fact, at least, that U.S. News will break out the best public universities as well. As someone who used to teach at UC Berkeley, I'm very proud of how well we tend to do in rankings and how amazing those students are. But what would you recommend in terms of parents and prospective graduates or prospective students who are trying to just get a little edge, who just need a little guidance in terms of picking this school or that?
I think one of the most important things is the support from the career centers in terms of internship and other career support. I think you can get a feel for that only by really visiting these career centers, or at least reaching out to them and having a conversation. I think that is a lot more important because the school can be very highly ranked, let's say in one department, but it could be lousy in another department. So, what you major in really affects what your experience is going to be like at that school, including the effort you put in.
What is your sense of whether or not the things that students are looking for have evolved over time? I mean, the Carnegie classifications, which rank things like Research One universities, are evolving to factor in other details, including how students of color do. Even the U.S. News rankings changed the way they weight SAT and ACT scores because the pandemic upset how we do so many tests. Before I have to let you go, how do you think that students are changing the way they think about where they go to school before we go?
I didn't really notice a lot of change, to be totally candid. I think it's still very much driven by top 30 colleges and this perceived edge that you get from from graduating from one of these rear window sticker colleges, as I call them. And I think that's just a fact of life. I don't love it, but I try to teach kids to look beyond that.
Andy Lockwood, appreciate you making time for us tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Oh, should I mention that UC Berkeley was the #1 public school? Should I mention that? No, I'll just say go Bears and congratulate my students. But be that as it may, thank you for making time for us. I know these are super controversial. And as happy as I am to see UC Berkeley #1 public school, I'd like to hear your thoughts about these college rankings, whether you've used them or not, or your thoughts on the British monarchy, or your thoughts on anything we've discussed tonight. We're at NBC Now Tonight on social media. Call us at 888-575-2NBC or email nowtonight@nbcnews.com. So until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. We'll see you tomorrow, and go Bears. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.